Well, this was inevitable now, wasn't it? After I expressed which of the 10 monsters in the Monster Hunter series were my favourites, so many of you wanted to know which of the monsters were my least favourite, and I can certainly understand why. Now, as much as I love Monster Hunter, and it's some of the most fun I've had in just about any video game, there are things about the games that really get on my nerves or just piss me off to no end, and often most of this misery is caused by some of the monsters. Now, the majority of monsters in Monster Hunter are well designed, unique creatures that offer the player with challenging, memorable, and most importantly, fun battles, as well as rewarding you with weapons and armor from their remains in order to make yourself a much stronger hunter. Sadly, not all monsters in the series come with these perks, and end up being monsters that you never wished existed in the first place. In fact, you swear the developers put them in the game just to make your life miserable. I'm serious here, people. Bad monsters in Monster Hunter will become some of your most hated and despised enemies in any video game, period. This could be for many reasons. The monster is annoying to fight because of its movement patterns, the monster is cheap and really difficult to kill for all the wrong reasons, the monster is just dumb looking and makes you facepalm whenever you see it, the monster is just boring and is a chore to fight rather than being an engaging and fun battle, the monster gives you shit weapons and armor which you never use, or sometimes it's all of the above. Which brings us to today. After all, I've read the comment section and it's told me that you people wanted this badly. So, due to popular demand, join me as I count down my top 10 worst monsters in the Monster Hunter series. And this list was requested by God knows how many YouTube users, and I can't name them all here. Now, before we get started, this list is going to work slightly different from top 10 Monster Hunter monsters, since unlike that list, I'm mainly going to be focusing on why I hate the monsters rather than talking about its subspecies or weapons and armor, since most of the time, because I hate these monsters, I don't care about their subspecies and I pretty much never bother grinding them in order to get the weapons and armor, because trust me, it's not worth it in the end. I mean, if I feel it's relevant, then I will bring up the subspecies and the weapons and armor, but for the most part, this list is just going to be focused on the monster itself, and why, oh why, I hate these 10 monstrosities so damn much. Now please remember that this is just my own personal opinion, and everyone has their own reasons as to why they either love or hate certain monsters, and I'm no different. Trust me everyone, this list is going to cause controversy, raise eyebrows, and make people rage like nothing else. Because some of the monsters on this list are ones people are not going to be happy about seeing on here, and if you like them, that's perfectly fine. Continue to love these monsters and hunt them to your heart's delight. This is just my own opinion, and nothing more. Oh, and on a side note, as tempting as it is, no, I'm not going to include those small monsters on this list, since they're not the focus of the game, and aren't really a threat despite them being some of the most annoying things ever put into a video game. But I digress. Also, like last time, I'm only looking at the monsters that have been in Monster Hunter Tri, 3 Ultimate, and 4 Ultimate, and this includes monsters that have returned from previous games. And with all that cleared up, be sure to bring barrel bombs, drugged meat, traps, and a fuck ton of flash bombs, because it's time to tackle the worst of the worst that Monster Hunter has to offer, and they are not going to go easy on us. Much to my dismay. You know, Monster Hunter is home to some of the most unique and original creatures in just about any video game. I mean, every type of monster you could think of exists within this series, most of which are based on real life animals, just with slight variations to their design and physical features. I mean, you've got Velociraptor type monsters, giant spiders, wyverns, wolf monsters, leviathans, shark monsters, monkeys, saber-toothed tigers, and even giant enemy crabs. I thought I was talking about Monster Hunter, not Sony's E3 press conference. Anyway, coming in at number 10, we have the Diamo Hermitar. Now, truth be told, the Diamo Hermitar really isn't that bad of a monster. The actual monster itself is rather cool, as well as a unique twist on the typical hermit crab, and this guy isn't cheap or anything. However, this monster is also not very much fun to fight, and the reason he's on this list is for more personal reasons, which I will get into soon enough. Diamo Hermitar first appears once you reach the high rank story quest in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, and will be the first monster you fight in the dunes. Now from the get-go you can imagine what type of monster this thing is going to be like, since this thing is a crab monster and the giant skull on his back is actually its shell. So you immediately think to attack his flesh since the shell is going to be used for defense only, right? Well, not exactly, since this monster is smarter than you think. This thing will purposely face away from you not only to block attacks, but also to use its skull-shaped shell to ram into you and cause a lot of damage. Not only that, but because of its crab-like nature, this monster's attacks will mostly be about trying to cover what's directly in front of it, as well as both moving and attacking at the same time in order to cover as much ground as possible, so charging at this thing head on is certainly not the best idea in the world. Because of this, you have to make sure you stay in this monster's blind spot and never let him directly get in front of you, or else you're going to be what's on the menu, not this guy. If you stay in the blind spot for long enough, then this guy really isn't that hard, and the fight itself actually becomes somewhat boring after a while, since if you know what you're doing, this thing will just attack blindly without actually hitting you, and you could just go to town on him. So overall, this monster isn't too bad, but the main reason he's on here is that this monster was the first time in Monster Hunter 4 where I felt the game's difficulty suddenly spike, and this was the first monster to make me rage quit. Picture, if you will, you've just defeated the Shigaru Moraga, and now you're doing the high rank quests. All's well and good, and then you have to hunt this thing for the first time, so you think, okay cool, a new monster, that's always a fun time. Only to have this thing hit you just once, and suddenly you've lost more health than the combined strength of 3 Devil Joes. I'm serious, this thing is so powerful for the point in the game you're at, it's just fucking ridiculous, and you lose so much health from even the smallest attacks. And this isn't a case of me not having good enough weapons and armor, no, I had upgraded my weapons and armor as much as I could, to the point in which they couldn't go any further because I hadn't unlocked the plus rank monsters I needed for the materials. And even with all that, this guy still kicked my ass something fierce, and sometimes I would die and fail the quest after fighting him for such a long time that I just said, fuck it, I'm done, I can't do this anymore, I'm off to go take out my frustration on God knows how many Kinglers. I mean, once I beat him and faced him later on, only now with much better weapons and armor, this guy was no problem whatsoever. But I'll never forget how much misery this thing caused me for the first time around, and I'll never forgive it for what it did. Concerning the weapons and armor, there really isn't much to talk about, since its armor is okay. I mean, it gives you plus 20 defense, but nothing really else that matters, and the only Diamo Hermita weapon that I remember was the Greatsword, and that weapon was not worth using since it only gave you high base damage with absolutely no affinity or elemental damage. In the end, the Diamo Hermita isn't that bad, but it's not the most exciting monster to fight, and can either be the biggest pain in the arse in the world or a complete joke if you know what you're doing. As far as I'm concerned, Diamo Hermita, go back to the Sony press conference and get the fuck out of my Monster Hunter game, or else I'm having crab soup for dinner and there will be a lot to go around. Trust me. Most, if not all, video games have easy bosses early on, so that the player can overcome them without too much hassle. I mean, most of the time the player is rather weak at the beginning of the game, so if you're not too careful the boss could beat you. But for the most part they're easy enough to handle for just about anyone. Monster Hunter is no exception to this, and there are many easy level monsters to get the players familiar with the game. Things like the Great Jaggi, the Korapeko, the Celtus, the Quechuaca, and so on. I mean, these monsters can give you trouble if you decide to act like a complete and utter moron, but most of the time you can kill them no problem since they're early game bosses and they're meant to be easy. However, being an early game boss does not excuse you from being piss easy, so could someone tell me what the Azorus' excuse is? Don't you just find it ironic? Bears are some of the most dangerous animals in the world, as well as being some of the strongest mammals. But in the world of Monster Hunter, this thing is so easy that you could probably kill it without ever needing to sharpen your weapon or use a single potion. Funny how things turn out in the end, isn't it? Now, like I mentioned before, the Azorus is on here because this thing is so easy it's a borderline joke, and it puts up no challenge whatsoever. However, there are a few factors that prevent this monster from going any lower on this list that actually make this monster very useful to hunt in the long run. The Azorus first appeared in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate and was one of the first monsters you hunted alongside the Great Jaggi. From the very first time I fought him, this monster was just pathetic. I mean, it was so slow and dumb it never once hit me, and I kept wailing on it constantly without needing to either pause or retreat, since this thing's attack and movement patterns were so easy to read I could see exactly what it was going to do and counter this thing with next to no effort. Even with really low rank armor and weapons, this guy still put up no challenge, and most of the time it just fumbled about aimlessly without any sense of coordination or plan of attack. I'm not sure if that was the intent, to make this creature incredibly apathetic, but even when this thing was angry, he was still a joke. I mean, if he does manage to hit you, he can deal a surprising amount of damage, but that's about it, and never once did this guy ever kill me or put me in any real danger. Now, while this monster is essentially the magic half of the Monster Hunter series, his level of difficulty, or in this case lack of difficulty, actually makes him great for early game grinding, since you can get some pretty decent weapons and armor from him. Since for the point in the game in which you're at, his armor gives you pretty good amount of defense, and some abilities like increased defense and recovery can be useful when going up against some of the stronger early game monsters like the Barroth or the Ludroth. Also, the Azuros weapons, while rather limited, have pretty good base power and sharpness, as well as the poison ability if you happen to have the skill that unlocks latent weapon elements. Because of this, grinding this guy early on can be a great help in the long run, since the armor and weapons you can get can last you long enough without having to make god knows how many weapons and armor sets just to keep up with every new monster that appeared. And because this thing is so damn easy to grind, getting all the materials is no problem whatsoever. If you're curious about the other bear-like monsters like the Logombi or the Volvidon, well, the Logombi isn't really good, but he's not awful. I mean, he's got some unique attacks despite being very easy, and some of the ice weapons you can make for him are good, even though the Zimitros ice weapons just shit all over Logombis. And in the case of Volvidon, I actually really like this monster, since the way it fights is rather unique and this guy can actually be rather challenging, so he certainly stands out and is an all-around strong monster. The Azuros, however, isn't nearly as impressive. I mean, yeah, he can be a great help at the beginning of the game because of the weapons and armor, but once you cross that bridge, all that's left is the pathetic joke of a monster that this thing is. I mean, the only way this monster could have been better is if suddenly it decided to wear yellow shorts and carry around a blue backpack with a bird in it. Now that would have been awesome. You want to know what type of enemies are the worst? The ones that completely troll you. You know which ones I'm talking about, right? The ones that won't necessarily kill you, but are designed to make you lose major amounts of health. The ones that purposely fuck with you and just end up slowing your progression down or make the fights with them tedious as hell. Most of the time, these types of enemies will either take away some of your abilities, or in the worst case, inflict you with some form of status ailment like poison or paralysis. When it comes to Monster Hunter, there are some monsters that focus more on using ailments to defeat you, like the Gendrome or the Eodrome, but the monster that loves to troll you the most more than any other is the fucking Gypsaurus. Okay people, this is where the hatred begins to surface, and it's only gonna get worse from here. While I don't like the Azuros or the Diamo Hermitar, they weren't awful monsters or ones I hated fighting. That's not the case with the Gypsaurus, since this monster is a complete and utter troll. Seriously, it's just such a dickhead monster that's more hassle to fight than it should be, and most of the fights with this thing drag out much longer than they should for all the wrong reasons. Now truth be told, for the most part, Gypsaurus isn't that bad of a monster. I mean, he acts like most typical wyverns, and the majority of his attacks aren't too much hassle to avoid, so fighting this thing is pretty standard for the most part. But then the Gypsaurus suddenly decides to be a complete dick by pulling the two most annoying attacks out of his ass: flash attacks and those fucking poison attacks. Now the flash attacks, as you may have guessed, cause the screen to flash white and you become temporarily stunned, if you just so happen to be looking at the Gypsaurus at the time. Now Gypsaurus will usually signal when it's going to do this, giving you enough time to look away or block the blinding flash, and if you break its crest it won't be able to use the flash at all. However, sometimes this thing will instantaneously use its attack without warning, causing you to become stunned and left wide open to a beatdown for completely unfair reasons. And it's not like the Gypsaurus just speeds up the animation, no, it instantaneously activates it without any sort of warning, which is fair, right? Not being able to react to an attack that leaves you helpless. And then there's the poison attacks. Now the Gypsaurus has two types of poison attacks. The first one involves him just shooting a big blob of poison at you, which does quite a bit of damage, but it should be easy enough to dodge, provided you're not healing or in mid-swing of your weapon, otherwise you're most likely going to get hit. Second and most annoying is when this thing just runs around like a complete moron and shoots poison from side to side. Now this attack is actually rather easy to dodge if you're not in the Gypsaurus' line of fire, but this thing runs around for so fucking long, and often does it up to 3 times in a row, that you're just left standing there until it tries to finish, since you really can't hope to attack this thing while it's running around like that. You know when I said the fight goes on longer than necessary? Well, it's because of these attacks which either leave you helpless to defend against the Gypsaurus, or you simply can't attack this thing without causing yourself to take damage. Also, when the Gypsaurus gets low on health, it plays dead for a while, then gets up again in the hope of landing a surprise attack on you. But honestly, I don't see the point in this, because I never get hit from this thing's quote-unquote surprise attack, and most of the time it just leaves itself open to a further beating. Its subspecies, the purple Gypsaurus, is pretty much the same for the most part, only this thing can produce the dreaded red poison, which drains your health much faster than normal poison, making this version of the monster even more annoying to fight. And don't worry, I'll have a lot to say about red poison later on, trust me. Though credit given where credit is due, since you can make some pretty potent poison weapons from Gypsaurus cards, which is great if you're more of the support type player, and the armor you get from this thing completely negates poison, which can be very useful when dealing with other monsters outside of just Gypsaurus. Still, that doesn't change the fact this thing is still really annoying to fight and just trolls with you in order to drag out this already annoying battle. Gypsaurus may be a decent monster for the most part, but those trollish attacks really get on my nerves and cause the fight to go downhill very quickly. Thank God for the Rathalos hammer. I swear that thing took this monster down in no time flat, and all the better for it, because I do not have time for this monster's shit. Flagship monsters are the monsters that are pretty much poster boys for the games they represent, and the series as a whole. Monsters like the Gormagala, the Rathalos, the Lagiacrus, the Zinogre are all examples of flagship monsters, and very often they're some of the best monsters in the game for both the fun factor and the weapons and armor they give you. And this makes sense, since these monsters are the ones that catch your eye right from the beginning, and sometimes they're the focus of the story, like in the case of the Gormagala. However, there is one flagship monster I simply cannot stand fighting, and I know I'm going to get so much hate for this, because next to the Rathalos, this guy is pretty much the mascot for the Monster Hunter series and has been with the game since Monster Hunter Freedom 2. In fact, quite a lot of people love hunting this thing, whereas I find hunting this monster to cause me nothing but grief and frustration. So without further ado, I'm sorry people, but I don't like the Tigrex. Okay, everyone, just calm down. Look, I understand you're upset by the fact that the Tigrex is on here, and I imagine that a lot of you are foaming at the mouth right now. Well, first of all, this isn't the first time you'll be foaming at the mouth, guys, and secondly, I'm really sorry, but I don't like fighting this thing. Seriously, from the first time I hunted this thing, even till now, the Tigrex just caused me so much grief from what should be a rather straightforward fight, and I never have a fun time with this thing. Now, the Tigrex has appeared in many Monster Hunter games and is one of the most popular monsters alongside the Rathalos. As such, this thing has left its impact on the Monster Hunter community for being one of the most fearsome, coolest, unique and dangerous monsters in the series. And I'll agree to that. The Tigrex has certainly earned his place as a flagship monster for this series, and he's definitely one of the most unique monsters in the series. But that doesn't mean I like him. The main reasons for this is that I find the main problem with the Tigrex is that this thing is way too fast for its own good. Its attacks cover a much larger area than you think, and this thing is fucking relentless. Now, the fact that the Tigrex is a fast monster isn't surprising. I mean, just look at this thing. It's designed to be fast and move about quickly, but the Tigrex is way too fast for its own good. This is more obvious when the Tigrex becomes enraged, because this thing travels at such high speeds it's rather difficult to either avoid or retreat from him, and sometimes his attacks activate so damn fast that it's almost impossible to react to them, which causes you to take a hit and leave you wide open to a beatdown. Which brings me to my next problem, that the Tigrex is fucking relentless. Oh my god, once this thing starts attacking you, it will not stop until it beats you to a bloody corpse and you fainted within seconds. This is once again because this thing is too fast for its own good, since while you're getting up for its attack, this thing has already made its next move and you're helpless to defend against it. Now, in the defense of the Tigrex, there are other monsters that are similar in the sense that when they attack you, the second you recover from an attack, they'll attack you again and pretty much kill you then and there like the Brachydios. But I find the Tigrex to be one of the worst monsters that do this, and most of the time, once the Tigrex hits a single hit on you, you're pretty much fucked. And finally, the thing that annoys me most about the Tigrex is the fact that this thing's attacks have much bigger hitboxes than you think, making him even more difficult to avoid. As if running around at the speed of sound wasn't bad enough, now this thing can hit you from not too far away. I imagine some of you are rather confused since this thing doesn't have any projectile attacks aside from when it pushes the boulders at you, so it can't hit you from a distance. Well, when I said large area attack, I mean the fact that this thing's tail whip attack is pretty much impossible to avoid if it pulls off within striking distance of you, which is most of the time by the way, no matter where you're facing, and the fact that this thing's roar hurts you. Yes, you heard me correctly, this thing's roar hurts you. Sheesh, could you be more frustrated in fight Tigrex? I mean, I understand that monster roars cause you to become stunned for a short amount of time. That makes sense, but actually causing physical damage is going a bit too far, don't you think? Now, Tigrex isn't the only monster whose roars can hurt you, since both the Najarala and Ukanlos, not sure if I pronounced that right, have roars that hurt you, but at least with those monsters, you can react in time to either block or dodge their roars, whereas the Tigrex activates his attacks so fast you can pretty much never anticipate when it's going to use its attacks, and even having the maxed out earplug skill doesn't help either. Concerning the subspecies, the Brute Tigrex isn't much better since this thing loves to use roar attacks more than any of its other attacks, and in the case of the Molten Tigrex, I actually don't mind fighting him. I mean, yes, he is much stronger and now has explosive attacks which deal a ridiculous amount of damage, but at the same time the Molten Tigrex is slower and easier to anticipate even when in rage, which makes the fight against him much less frustrating or cheap, since despite being significantly stronger, you can predict his attacks better and react to them in time. The Tigrex weapons and armor aren't very impressive either, since the armor gives you abilities like Auto Tracker, which I honestly don't find to be that useful since I find a paintball to do the job just fine, and Quick Eating, which both Dimitros and Deviljaw armor gives you, as well as not being that great of a skill to begin with. And in the case of the Tigrex weapons, I don't use them at all since while they have good base power and sharpness, they deal no elemental damage, and most of the time they have terrible levels of affinity. In the end, Tigrex is a monster I personally cannot stand fighting. I'll admit that the Tigrex has earned its place as a flagship monster of the series, and if you like this guy, that's perfectly fine, I completely understand. I just hate fighting this thing and it's never a fun time for me. Now helping this is the fact that the Tigrex doesn't really give you any worthwhile weapons and armor, and even if it was worthwhile grinding this thing, I still wouldn't do it because this thing is just too fast, frustrating and furious for its own good. I would say I hope to never see the Tigrex again, but we all know that's never going to happen, because as much as I hate to admit it, the Tigrex is here to stay, and at the end of the day, you've just got to deal with it. Well, I imagine I pissed a good number of you off by putting the Tigrex on this list. Well, sad to say, number 6 isn't exactly going to make you guys happy either. Well, at least some of you. Funny enough, when I looked at the comments for top 10 best Monster Hunter monsters, I found that 50% of people really liked this monster, whereas the other 50% hated this monster. And sorry to say, but I'm in the same boat when it comes to that particular monster. Now I can understand why people would like this monster, and there are certainly a good number of positives to this guy. However, the negatives in my opinion far outweigh the positives and result in one of the most difficult and downright soul-crushing monsters I've ever faced. So brace yourself people, because number 6 on this list is the Rajang. Oh boy, I'm just digging myself into an early grave at this point. Now, like I said before, people were very 50-50 when it came to either loving or hating the Rajang, and I can certainly see why. But that doesn't change the fact that I cannot stand going up against him, and never has a monster beat me down so hard that I just completely lost any interest in playing like the Rajang did. I feel I should at least talk about the positives about the Rajang first, because this monster certainly has got quite a few things going for it, and I like to give credit where credit is due. First and foremost, I love the design of the Rajang. I mean, seriously Capcom, a gorilla ram monster that shoots electricity? Damn, you guys certainly have a creative bunch of designers. But in all seriousness, the Rajang is an awesome looking monster, and this thing just screams, bro, do you even lift? Not to mention that when it becomes enraged, suddenly it sprouts electric fur, and all of a sudden it becomes an Electabuzz on steroids. No wait, that's an Electivire. Well, you get the idea anyway. Not to mention, the Rajang also gives you pretty damn good equipment, so some of the Rajang weapons make for good lightning weapons with high levels of base power, and the Rajang armor is pretty good and gives you abilities like Adrenaline and increased sharpness. The only problem is that I would never grind this thing in a million years. Why? Because the Rajang is a rampaging asshole! Okay, if you just so happen to have no problem hunting in the Rajang and actually rather enjoy it, good for you, you certainly got more patience than me, so I tip my proverbial hat to you. But that doesn't change the fact that I hate fighting this monster for the same reasons I hate fighting the Tigrex. The Rajang is simply way too fast for its own good, and he never, ever gives you any sort of space or breathing room to escape or recover the moment he sets his sight on you. If you thought the Tigrex attacked you relentlessly, you haven't seen shit until you face the Rajang. I mean, the speed in which the Rajang moves is something Sonic the Hedgehog would be jealous of, and most of his attacks cause the ground to shake, which can cause you to lose your balance and leave you open to a beating. This is made worse by the fact that the Rajang is extremely powerful. I mean, the fact that this thing had fucking fists was the first sign that this thing was packing some serious muscle. I mean, this thing can pick up and throw boulders from the ground with just one hand, but the amount of damage the Rajang does to you is just plain silly, and very often his attacks will send you so far flying that it will take you ages to recover from them, and by the time you have, this thing has already started attacking you once again. And even if you manage to escape from this thing, or get enough distance from it, that's not going to help you in the long run, since not only can this thing shoot lightning at you, which by the way, is much more difficult to avoid than it looks, trust me, the fact that this thing will spin dash at you at breakneck speed essentially means it's going to break your neck. You could argue that the Tigrex is worse because its attacks have large hitboxes and are harder to avoid. But at least the Tigrex didn't take 70% of your life with a single hit and shoot lightning from a distance. Seriously, fuck that lightning attack. Also, no offense to the Rajang, but if I want lightning weapons, I'll grind the Zenogre or trade for the Gaiacrus materials, thanks very much. Anything to avoid you like the plague. Again, the Rajang isn't the worst monster of all time, and there's definitely merit to this guy, but that doesn't change the fact that this thing is just far too frustrating to fight, and even once you get better weapons and armor, this thing doesn't get any more fun. The Rajang may look cool and give you decent weapons and armor, but none of that means shit when you have to deal with one of the strongest and fastest monsters in the entire series, as well as one of the most ferocious and downright brutal monsters to date. I don't know about you lot, but I'm staying as far away from the Rajang as possible, because I'd rather not put up with having the ever-loving shit kicked out of me and then beaten to a bloody pulp. Which is sadly what's going to happen with the next entry on this list. This is what I was dreading most about this list. After uploading my top 10 Monster Hunter monsters, the comments section was flooded with people asking, why is it this monster on the list? What about this monster? Dude, I love this monster, why isn't he in the top 10? And all of them were referring to the same monster. Well people, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I just happen to hate this monster. I mean really hate this monster for many reasons, and truth be told, I'm not exactly sure what everyone loves about this monster. I mean, with the Tigrex and the Rajang, I can understand why people would like them, but this? I just don't see why so many people love this guy. Nevertheless, this subject needs to be addressed because this has been bugging me for a while and I'm sure you're already ready to throw bricks at my window. Well, I better get out some home insurance because sorry everyone, but I hate the Nargacuga. Now I've gone and done it. At this point, I'm sure the dislike bar is going to reach higher levels than the Metro Prime Federation Force trailer. Look everyone, I'm really sorry, but I just don't like the Nargacuga, and there really aren't many positives I can think of for him. I mean, if you like this thing, fair enough, that's your opinion, and I'm not going to sully you for it. But I just don't see the appeal of this monster, and I hate fighting this thing. I mean, I've faced this thing many times during Monster Hunter 3, and no matter how good my armor and weapons were, or if I was playing on or offline, the Nargacuga was one of the most tedious monsters I've ever had the displeasure of facing. Okay, I don't want to sound like a wet blanket, so I'll give the Nargacuga this. I like its design. Seriously, I think the Nargacuga is a cool looking and unique monster, since it very much looks like a panther wyvern monster, and overall I think it looks pretty cool. But looks aren't everything, and this monster offers nothing but pain and misery once you actually start to see this thing's true colours. The biggest problem I have with the Nargacuga is that like both the Rajang and the Tigrex, this thing is way too fast for its own good. Now this may sound like I don't like fast monsters in general, but that's not the case since both the Zenogre and the Barioth are fast monsters and I love to hunt them. But this thing, Oh god, this thing is just so fast and relentless, you can never catch a break. Not only does this thing have fast attacks, but by far the thing I hate the most about this thing is the fact that the very second it jumps to avoid you or move to a different position and lands, it will strike you before you have time to adjust yourself, since most of the time he does this while you're attacking him. This is what annoys me the most about the Nargacuga. The amount of times this thing has blindsided me and then hit me before I could even start to make a move was just disgusting, and like all annoying monsters, the moment this thing attacks you, it doesn't stop until you're dead. I mean, both the Rajang and the Tigrex are much stronger than the Nargacuga, and the Nargacuga itself doesn't deal too much damage, but that doesn't change the fact that the Nargacuga hits you more times than you hit it, and the Nargacuga can still kill you in a decent number of hits, especially if you use that bloody tail attack, which I swear has some of the finniest hitboxes I've ever seen in Monster Hunter. Since there have been times where I've been hurt by this thing despite not even standing close enough to being touched by it with the long end of a stick. Also, because the Nargacuga doesn't ever stay still, most of the fights with this thing go on way too long and end up wearing you down and just tiring you out, since this thing won't let you attack it at all, and most of the time you're the one taking the beatings. What's worse is that I find no reason to grind this thing whatsoever, since I really don't like the armor it gives you, since while it does give you increased evasion, it lowers your stamina, and the weapons themselves, I'll admit they can be rather useful, since they have very high levels of affinity, good base damage, and good sharpness as well. But even then, I wouldn't bother grinding this thing since it takes longer than necessary to take this monster down, and the frustration that comes with it is something I'm not willing to put up with. The subspecies don't help the Nargacuga's case, since the green Nargacuga is just like the original, only more ferocious, and most of his attacks have a much higher chance of stunning you, and the lucid Nargacuga has the ability to turn invisible, because it's not like keeping track of this thing wasn't hard enough before. If you're still not happy about the Nargacuga being on here, that's fine. This is just my opinion, and feel free to hunt this monster to your heart's content. Personally, I cannot stand this thing, and I'm glad they did not bring it back for Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. Though to be fair, I think I just mount the fuck out of it in that game. Well, the hardest part of the countdown is over, so it's nothing but smooth sailing from here, because the next couple of monsters on this list are ones that everybody hates, especially the next entry. When it comes to Monster Hunter, everyone is going to have different views and opinions on what makes a monster good and what makes a monster bad. People will like or dislike certain monsters for various different reasons, and rarely will people have the exact same thoughts and opinions concerning each monster. However, there is one particular monster where everyone's opinion is pretty much unanimous at this point, since everyone, and I mean everyone, I talk to about this monster all hate this one monster with a burning passion, myself included. I mean, I don't know a single person that likes fighting this thing, and it has left many players with nothing but painful memories and teeth-grinding frustration. And I think I speak for everyone when I say, fuck the Plesioth. Oh yeah, you knew this monster was going to be on this list. I think the real shocker is the fact that Plesioth isn't number 1. Well, as much as I hate this monster, much like the rest of the world, I don't think it's the worst monster ever, since it has some, though very small, redeemable qualities. However, that does not change the fact that this monster is one of the biggest pains in the arse in the entire series, and has been the bane of many hunters in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate. In fact, I remember a lot of my friends being turned off Monster Hunter because in the 3 Ultimate demo, you could fight this thing, and well, you can imagine how much trouble the Plesioth would give an inexperienced hunter. Oh yeah, this monster is that bad, and like many players, I rejoice at the fact that it didn't show up in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate. Now there are many things that people hate about the Plesioth, but for me, personally I find the worst thing about the Plesioth to be its behaviour and attack patterns. I swear to god, the Plesioth is such an erratic and unpredictable monster. It's almost impossible to figure out what this monster is going to do, and half the time this monster will pull a random move out of its ass and it will be the one thing you least suspect, and more than likely result in you taking a lot of damage. I mean, with most monsters, they usually position themselves and establish their bearings before attacking you, even ones as fast as the Tigrex and the Nargacuga, but the Plesioth just says, fuck it, I'm just going to move about randomly and do whatever the fuck I feel like. Which you think would make the monster easy, since some of his attacks would be either useless at either long or short range. But the majority of Plesioth's moves cover a really wide area of attack, and a lot of the time his attacks allow him to travel very far distances very quickly. One of the things I found to be the most annoying about the Plesioth is that often this thing will run up to you and instantly begin attacking you, so you better hope to God it uses a slow attack or that you have a shield ready, because if not, you're more than likely going to take a hit, especially if he does that fucking tail whip attack, which I'm convinced you simply cannot dodge even if you stand directly underneath the damn thing. This is made worse by the fact that the Plesioth is just as difficult to fight on land as it is in sea. I mean, come on, in Monster Hunter 3, sea monsters were still dangerous on land, but gave you a much easier time fighting them, but the Plesioth is just as difficult no matter where you fight it. Plesioth's erratic nature also makes it rather difficult to land hits on him, since once this thing starts moving, it constantly moves and it never stays fucking still. Trying to land multiple hits on this thing is nearly impossible, and trying to stay alive is just as difficult, since this thing just won't leave you alone sometimes. Also, Plesioth's Hydro Pump attack can go suck some Devil Joe dick. I mean, with monsters like the Tigrex and the Rajang, it was a case of, oh please God, don't kill me, just let me escape this one time. But when it comes to Plesioth, it's that, plus a healthy dose of, oh my God, just stay fucking still so I can kill you already! Making the fight with the Plesioth both frustrating and rage-inducing, as well as long and tedious at the same time. Concerning its subspecies, honestly I don't see the point in the green Plesioth, since the only real difference is that it stays in the water more and uses more water-based attacks, but that's about it. I mean, when you consider subspecies like the Jade Baroth, the Glacier-like Nectar, the Stygian Zenoga and the Berserk Tetsukabra, the green Plesioth is a really underwhelming subspecies monster and feels like a reskin more than anything. Okay, we've established that Plesioth is a crappy monster, but there is one thing I like about the Plesioth, and it's the equipment it gives you. I mean, the Plesioth armor is rather good, since you get some pretty good abilities like Trap Master, Capture Expert, Heat Cancel, and Marathon Runner despite looking like a complete moron. And I really like the Plesioth weapons, since I found them to be some of the best water weapons in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, especially my beloved Plesioth hammer. I killed many an Uragan and a Gnacta with that baby. Even with good equipment, that doesn't change the fact that the Plesioth just fucking sucks as a monster. I'm not surprised that everyone hates this thing. I mean, it's one thing to be a pain in the ass monster that doesn't leave you alone, but to also be a monster that doesn't stay still, takes longer than necessary to kill, is difficult to fight in both land and sea, and is such an annoying pain in the ass this made many players turn off from the series in general when they tried the demo. Plesioth don't ever come back to Monster Hunter as an actual boss again. Just remain something you can fish up in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, and the world will be a much better place. I've expressed many times that Monster Hunter is one of the most fun and rewarding video games I've ever played. Seriously, the thrill you get from taking down these larger-than-life monsters by understanding their movement patterns and attacks, as well as exploiting their weaknesses, is something I cannot even begin to describe, and when doing this online or locally with friends and other players, it only amplifies the experience, and even monsters as frustrating as the Tigrex and the Plesioth suddenly become a fun time for everyone. With that said, however, there is one monster in the series that I never have a fun time fighting, whether it's by myself or in multiplayer. And this isn't because the monster is frustrating or cheap, oh no, in fact this monster is rather well balanced and its attack and movement patterns aren't anything cheap or frustrating, and overall it's a well designed monster. So you must be thinking to yourself, how on earth can you hate a monster that isn't frustrating and is rather well designed? Well, I certainly found a way to hate the Nibblesnarf. Yeah, that's right, I hate the Nibblesnarf. Hey, if you like this monster, that's fine, but personally, I just hate fighting this thing, even if the monster doesn't even come close to frustrating me as much as Nagakuga and Plesioth. So why do I hate this monster? Well, it's simple. This monster is boring. B-O-R-I-N-G, boring. I swear, even when I'm online with a great team of hunters, this monster still finds a way to be probably one of the most boring and dull monsters I've ever faced in Monster Hunter. I mean, you can make the argument that monsters like the Plesioth are much more difficult and frustrating, thus should be placed higher than the Nibblesnarf. But even with monsters like that, once you take them down, you get a real sense of pride and satisfaction from conquering this beast, despite the frustration that came with it. I never get that with Nibblesnarf, since the monster just puts me to sleep every time I face it, and I don't think I've ever had legitimate fun facing this thing. Like I mentioned previously, the Nibblesnarf is not a poorly designed or frustrating monster. In fact, I feel the way it acts and the type of attacks it has are fitting with the monster's design and behaviour, so at least this monster doesn't give me any sort of grief. In fact, this monster doesn't give me anything! I mean, come on Capcom, how could you make this thing boring? I mean, you made fighting flying insects, toads and anglerfish fun, so how on earth did you make a monster based around what I assume to be a sand-based shark or something boring? Now I bet a lot of you are wondering what makes this thing so boring. Well, maybe it's just me, but whenever I fight this thing, the Nibblesnarf really doesn't do anything exciting or surprise me in any way. All it does is casually surf along the sands and occasionally try to bite you. The only time the fight gets more interesting is when the Nibblesnarf decides to use sand tornado attacks, or if you just so happen to fish it out of the ground. Another reason this monster is so boring is that because it dwells in the sand so much, most of the fight is just you chasing after the damn thing and waiting for it to stop for a second so that you can actually attack the bloody thing. Like with the Plesioth, this thing doesn't ever stay still, and as such the fight goes on for longer than necessary, which makes the fight even more boring than it already was, and I didn't think that was even possible at this point. The Nibblesnarf is not worth grinding in my opinion either, since the equipment you get from it is not very impressive. I mean, the armor gives you decent abilities at best like speed eating and quick sheath, and the weapons give you decent water weapons, but if I wanted water weapons, I'll hunt the Plesioth, Cetus or Royal Ludroth, since they give you better weapons and are much more fun and interesting monsters to battle. Yes, even the Plesioth is more fun to fight than this bore. At the end of the day, the Nibblesnarf is a monster that leaves no impression on me and just puts me to sleep every time I face it. Even when I have ridiculously powerful weapons and armor, or I have a fantastic hunting party with me, this thing is never a fun time because it offers nothing of substance, and at the end of the day it's just kinda there. In fact, that's the best way I can describe the Nibblesnarf. It's just there. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with the monster, but it really fails to stand out in the slightest, and thus lands on the number 3 spot of my worst monsters in the Monster Hunter series. Obviously the best thing about Monster Hunter is the monsters themselves, and this is mainly due to the fact that they're such cool looking and unique creatures that they all stand out as some really fearsome beasts, and you remember just about every monster because they look like, well, monsters. I mean things like the Ralphalos, the Brachydios, the Zynoga, the Lagiacrus, the Tetsukabra, the Tigrex, the Baroth, the Duramboros, the Deviljho and so on are all visually unique and interesting monsters, as well as being just so damn menacing and fear-inducing that you really feel intimidated by them the first time you face them. I mean, not all monsters want to make you shit your pants when you see them, like the Quechuaca and the Volvidon, but they are at least unique looking and have a sense of charm to them. But unfortunately, not every monster in this series shares the same visual qualities. In fact, one particular monster is so unoriginal and dumb looking that I can never take this thing seriously. And this is made worse by the fact that this thing is pretty much a joke to fight. I mean, when it comes to being the dunce of the Monster Hunter series, the award goes to number 2 on this list, the Congalala. I'm sorry people, I just cannot keep a straight face when I see this thing. I mean seriously Monster Hunter, a fucking pink gorilla? Worse than that, a dumb fat pink gorilla? Did the guys at Capcom come in one day and just make this monster in 10 minutes, or did they put this guy in the game as a joke? Well, you certainly made me laugh because honest to god, this monster is an absolute joke. I mean, not only is it one of the silliest and least threatening monsters in the series to date, but this thing is just so damn easy to fight, and some of its attacks just make me want to shake my head in pity for just how stupid this thing really is. I will say that it is hilarious to go up against this monster, but for all the wrong reasons, since honestly it's amazing to see just how dumb and downright pathetic this monster really is. The two things that hurt the Congalala the most are its design and its attacks and or behavioural patterns. Design wise, this thing is the least intimidating monster I've ever seen. I mean, it's a pink gorilla with the face of a hippo, and that's all that needs to be said. Honestly, I stopped taking this thing seriously at pink gorilla. I'm not saying pink is automatically makes the monster a joke, I mean just look at the pink Raytheon, because that thing will fuck you up something fierce. But with the Congalala, being pink just makes it seem so damn silly. This isn't helped by the fact that this thing constantly looks like it doesn't have a clue what's going on, and even when it's berserk, this thing still looks like a joke. I know looks aren't everything, I shouldn't be judging the Conga longer than just its looks alone, but the worst part is that once you start fighting this thing, then you begin to see just how stupid this gorilla really is. Like the Azuros, the Conga is an incredibly slow and easy to read monster. You should never have any trouble anticipating its attacks, and you will rarely ever get hit by it. I'll give the Conga this, it's actually rather strong, so if it does manage to land a hit on you, it can take away a decent amount of health, but trust me, that rarely happens, so don't worry about it. Also, the Conga does this one attack where depending on the mushroom it eats, it can use different breath attacks like fire or poison, which I think is a really neat idea, so props to you there. Just like with the Azuros though, this monster is piss easy to fight and puts up next to no challenge, but what makes this monster worse and makes me lose all respect for it is the fact that some of its attacks are just, I can't even begin to describe. First and foremost, one of its attacks has it swipe at you while moving forward, and at the end it falls over from exhaustion and just lies there, meaning you can go to town on it, and since it does this attack very often, this thing is just begging you to kill it. In fact, the monster does half the work for you, since even when enraged, it still falls over from exhaustion. Secondly, is that this monster also attacks you by flinging its own shit at you, ew, and finally farting on you. Really, Capcom? Farting on you? I mean seriously, this is Monster Hunter we're talking about, a series where creatures have the ability to make ice tornadoes, explosive slime, homing Dragon Balls, crush giant boulders with their jaws, generate electricity, turn invisible, summon icicles at will and use lava as body armor, and you made a monster who attacks you by farting of all things? I'm starting to see why you stopped making Mega Man games, because I wouldn't be surprised if the next Robot Master was called Fart Man and the weapon you got from him was the shit shield. The equipment this thing gives you isn't any good either, since the armor only gives you skills like Scavenger and Territorial Dung immunity, and the weapons themselves aren't much better since they don't have any elemental damage aside from sleep, as well as the fact they have crap levels of affinity. In terms of the subspecies, I actually think the green Conga isn't too bad. I mean, this guy is still really easy and it still attacks by farting on you, but it certainly looks more intimidating. I actually really like the green color palette, and it's much more ferocious and actively tries to attack you rather than just being there to be laughed at. Look, I know every series has a joke character in it or a purposely bad character, and Monster Hunter is no exception to this. As far as I'm concerned, the Conga is the dunce of the Monster Hunter series, and I don't think I'll ever come to respect it or find it to be an actual threat. I mean, it looks dumb, it acts dumb, its attacks are dumb, it's just a really dumb and silly monster. And as such, Conga takes the number 2 spot of my worst monsters in the Monster Hunter series, which just leaves the number 1 entry. So we've reached the number 1 spot, my worst monster in the Monster Hunter series, and right from the start I knew exactly what monster was going to be on here, since this monster was the first monster I found myself hating in the Monster Hunter series, and that hatred only got worse as time went on. So many times did this thing make my blood boil, so many times did this thing cause me to die because of complete and utter bullshit, so many times did I have to hunt this thing until I was able to beat it for the first time. And so many times did this thing just make me want to throw Monster Hunter Tri and Free Ultimate out the window, and into the fires of hell. For the number 1 worst monster in the entire series, go to the ultimate bane of my Monster Hunter existence, the Giginox. Oh man, I hate the Giginox. I mean hate the Giginox. Players of Monster Hunter Tri and Free Ultimate will more than likely sympathize with me as to why I hate the Giginox so much, but for those who haven't had the displeasure of hunting this thing, you might be surprised as to why I hate this monster so much, because truth be told, Giginox isn't as bad as the other monsters when it comes to certain areas. Since he's not as stupid as Conga, he's not as ferocious as the Tigrex and Okakuga, he's not nearly as dull as the Nibblesnarf, and he's not nearly as cheap as the Plesioth, though admittedly this thing is still pretty damn cheap. The reason I hate the Giginox is because this thing is just plain evil. I mean, this thing is 100% pure evil, and it will make your time in Monster Hunter miserable every time it goes up for it, and this is for many, many reasons. First and foremost, this thing just looks ugly. I mean, I don't know how to describe this thing aside from just ew. And sometimes just looking at this makes me feel nauseated. Secondly is that the Giganox has some of the biggest hitboxes I've seen in Monster Hunter. I mean, this thing's attacks have such large areas of coverage that you swear that it's impossible to avoid it the very second you get close enough to strike him. Needless to say, trying to avoid some of his attacks after you're done attacking him is nearly impossible. This is made worse by the fact that the Giganox has the ability to stretch and climb onto walls, so not only can it reach you from long distances with physical attacks, but it can also stay out of your way and stay away from harm while being able to attack you with no problem, and that's just plain cruel. Thirdly is that the Giganox is deceptively strong, and a good chunk of his attacks will take more health from you than what you'd think, and if you try to escape, this thing will very often roar to stop you in your tracks and leave you stunned so he can stretch attack you again. Since the only way to block this thing's roar is to make sure you have HG earplugs, which you will not have when you first face him, I will tell you that much. And by far, the worst thing about the Giganox is the fact that this thing is poisonous, and believe me, it knows it. I mean, this thing loves to spam poison attacks at you, and my god, these attacks are some of the biggest areas of effect I've ever seen. Needless to say that if you're going up against Giganox, be sure to bring as many antidotes as you can because you will get poisoned. Not might, will get poisoned. This is made a million times worse when you go up against the Giganox that has the red poison, because that shit will drain your health so damn fast it can kill you within a good 10 seconds, along with the base damage you sustained. I cannot tell you the amount of time I would be poisoned, only to either be attacked straight away by this thing, or have it roar, sometimes twice in a row, thank you very much, and keep the poison draining away at my health until it was too late and I was already dead. Seriously, this monster is just evil in every sense of the word, and I feel this thing was made just to make sure players had the worst possible time hunting this thing. Well, good for you, Capcom, you succeeded, and you left me with many scars that aren't going away anytime soon. As much as I hate to admit it, however, there are some good things about the Giganox. For one thing, this monster gives you some very potent poison weapons with very high levels of elemental damage, so if you're into that type of playstyle of using poison weapons, then grinding the Giganox is probably your best option, even if you have to suffer for it. Also, the Giganox armor is pretty damn good, since you get Constitution +2, negate poison and increase status attack. Plus, I don't find the Baleful Giganox, its subspecies, to be too bad. I mean, it's not a good monster, and it still suffers from all the problems I hate the Giganox for. But unlike the standard Giganox, the Baleful Giganox uses electricity and paralysis attacks, which I find to be much more tolerable than poison any day. Plus, it can give you some pretty decent weapons. At the end of the day, the monsters in Monster Hunter are designed to offer the player with the challenge of taking down these larger-than-life monsters that want you dead, and most of the time, these monsters are fighting simply to survive. But the Giganox is just plain evil and wants you to suffer before letting you die. With the Giganox, it's not simply a case of the monster trying to defend itself or ensure that you don't kill it. No, this thing enjoys making you suffer and ensures that you have the most miserable time facing this thing, which is why the Giganox takes the #1 spot as my worst monster in the Monster Hunter series. This has been CRASHX500. I wish you all a great night, take care, and even though the Monster Hunter series has some monsters I cannot stand fighting, that doesn't change the fact that the series as a whole is still fantastic, and I have so much fun with the series I can never stay mad at it for long. With all that said, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time.